Hello and welcome to the Humanware See Things Differently podcast. Each month, join your hosts Peter Tusick, Rachel Ramos, and David Woodbridge as we bring you engaging interviews from guests, interaction from our one-of-a-kind distribution partners, stories that'll take you off the beaten path, current promos, shows where you can find us, and so much more. So stick around.
Welcome, good morning, good evening, afternoon, good day. One of these days I'm going to get that intro actually down where it'll be something you will know. Peter does the same way every single month. But until then, you do know that now it is the third Thursday of March. Welcome to another episode of See Things Differently with Humanware, the podcast. Hello, Rachel.
Hello, Peter.
How are you doing? What's going on in your March land?
You know, March is looking like it's going to be a warm month. I cannot wait for spring. I'm going to furnish my patio. It's going to be amazing. I'm ready for it.
We're going to have an episode on patio furnishing coming up. Actually, I think that could be a theme for April, May. David, how's your patio and how are you doing over there in Australia?
I'm doing extremely well, and I'm loving the fact that it's now cooling down, so the humidity level is getting a lot better. So it's no longer sitting at 98% humidity, and I'm having cooler days because, of course, we're coming into proper spring. Not spring. You guys always confuse me. We're coming into autumn. Sorry, in this part of the hemisphere, and then it's winter. So this is my favourite time of the year now.
Well, I will, because I know everyone is used to your podcasting prowess, and we will point out that you are actually on location. You are committed, you are working, you're on the road, so you're coming to us from a remote location, not your typical home studio setup, right?
Absolutely.
So you're bearing with us, like just coming to us live, which is awesome, and that's the beauty of podcasting, right? We can always join. Even some months, one of us or multiples of us may not sound as good as at other points, depending on where we may be. But this month, in March, there are two things we're going to focus on, and the two pieces, it is International Women's Month, first of all, and secondly, we are going to be talking about orientation and mobility. And in doing both of those, we have a very neat set of segments here. Of course, we will have an interview, and then we'll talk about some tips and tricks, and we'll have a bit of a hot take segment and look at a cringeworthy story. Joining us is somebody who I think we're all going to be very excited to hear from, someone who is joining us from across the pond, is actually in Glasgow, Scotland, Michelle Young, but we're very glad you could join us. And Michelle is a orientation and mobility instructor. She is visually impaired herself, and has actually, I've read some pieces online that you've done for different cane travel and different experiences, and I know your story is awesome, but we'll get into some of that. But welcome to See Things Differently with Humanware, the podcast, and thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me, Peter, David, and Rachel. It's nice to be here.
We are fired up, and I guess, in looking at orientation mobility and kind of talking about our stories, and all of us here are, myself and David and Rachel, we're all totally blind and certainly received training for a long time, but I know you are not necessarily new to vision loss, but cane travel and sort of the orientation mobility side of things wasn't something you necessarily grew up with from a very early age. You came into this a bit later, right? You came in not as a young child, correct?
That's right. I was born with a congenital eye condition, but it was fairly non-aggressive, as it were. And then I developed a secondary one, which is quite degenerative so I have glaucoma, and that's degenerative. So it's becoming more and more, it's taking more of my vision as I get older. So for the first kind of 15 years of my life, I never used a cane. And then I was very reluctantly introduced to cane travel. And like any teenager, when handed a cane or handed anything that stands out, I was not particularly keen to adopt the cane, and was very restricted by my own mentality, I suppose. But my real sort of come to Jesus universe moment was when I was in my late 20s. I worked with Daniel Kish, who's an echolocation and flash sonar specialist, and he introduced me to a completely different methods of orientation and mobility, structured discovery, and change the length of your cane, do structured discovery, use echolocation. These were all completely foreign concepts, but they totally revolutionized how I traveled and how I went through life.
Can we unpack that a second? I am totally blind, and I'll tell you the first 15 years of my life, as someone who absolutely should have been using a cane and did use a cane at school, don't get me wrong, but never, ever wanted to take the cane outside. And I'm sure, I don't know, and Rachel and David, if you had this sort of experience as well, but I was embarrassed, and I was totally blind. I mean, I would rather, and I think it's because, it was easier just to hold my mom's wrist and then eventually her elbow, right? As opposed to, or just have friends, I would just be bumping into things, or I was too embarrassed to even go hang out with friends at times because I didn't want to use the cane. And you talk about in the article I read about realizing that you could be far more confident, and just that kind of dawned on you at some point that walking through life with a cane was empowering. And it sounds cliche, I absolutely had the same experience. And eventually realized well, if I want to go do things, if I want to be as independent as I can be, and independence will look different for every one of us, but the cane was going to be how I was going to get there. And I had to get over that, I don't know, that not embarrassment, but just that kind of shame factor that, you're probably the only one, unless you're at some sort of convention, the only one with a white cane in the room or in the space you're in, but that it is going to be something that gives you lots and lots of empowerment and confidence. I had that exact same piece. Did that happen because you saw somebody, you were with somebody else using a cane? Because that's how it happened for me. Or was it just something you naturally were like, well, I got to get out. I've got to start doing these things that I want to do.
I was 16 years old. I was at high school and I had a crush. And my crush used to walk home for lunch. And one day I was going to the hospital and he said to me, "Oh, do you want me to walk you? I'll walk with you to the bus stop." And of course, 16-year-old me was just dying at this point. And I thought, I've got to walk. But the sun was really, really bright. And at that point, I'd been learning cane skills around the school. So people had seen me learning cane, but I didn't use it at school because I had enough vision where I could manage inside, but outside, darkness and sunshine were becoming very problematic. And we were crossing a road and we got to the middle island and I tripped over the curb and fell right on my knees in front of the object of my affections. And he just turned to me deadpan and said, if you were using that stick thing they're teaching you to use, that wouldn't have happened. Would it not just be more sensible to use it?
Perfect. I love it.
And I was kind of like, yeah, probably would. So I sat on the bus on the way to the hospital, and it was in my bag. This is what makes it funnier. It was in my bag.
You had it with you.
And I got to the hospital, and I unfolded the cane when I got off the bus, and that was my, eureka moment of, I'm going to use my cane, because in actual fact, you do look much more silly when you're banging into things and tripping over things than when you're moving through the world with a bit of grace and a bit of confidence using your cane. And when I work with young people, Look is an organisation I work with, Look UK, and they work with young people, and I tell that story and I get a lot of laughs from the teenagers because it's quite, even though I'm much older than they are in their eyes, it's really relatable for them. And I think you've got to find, it has to be something that's relatable to someone else to make you use the cane, whether it's, as you say, seeing someone travelling through the world independently. And, people, wheelchair users talk about, they're not bound to their wheelchairs. Their wheelchairs give them independence. They enable them to get out and live life. That's what a cane or a dog for some people, a cane or a dog enables you to do. It's not something to be embarrassed about. It's just how we interact with the world.
Did your family also, in a sense, enable you not to need to use a cane because they were able to help you, right? You would take someone's elbow, or someone was always going to tell you if maybe there were some steps, or because a lot of times, especially for me, I would just rely on my family who knew my needs and who didn't push me to use the cane because it wasn't something that, I didn't need to do it around them because I could rely on their help. And it got to the point where my mom, I'll never forget this. Once somebody got a hold of her and told her, like, listen, you are not helping the cause here, right? And we got to a store once and she said, "Where's your cane?" And I said, "What do you mean? I'm not using the cane." I was probably in about 8th grade, so maybe 13-ish here in the States. And she goes, "Well, if you don't have it with you, you're not coming in the store." And I was like, whoa, stop the car. Like, wait a minute, that's not how this works. And she said, "Yes, it does." And she went into the store and just left me outside. And I told this story. I bring her on the road, and we told this story a couple of years ago at an event for parents called "We Have Been in Your Shoes" or something like that. I forced her to come on the road and present with me, and she's like, "I didn't do that." And I was like, "Oh, yes, you did." But I'm curious, did your family also, even if, like you said, school was trying to teach you, but maybe there wasn't a carryover?
Well, it's interesting because I did a lot of masking as a younger child, pretending to see like a lot more than I could. So when the cane arrived, my family were generally, and my friends were like, "You don't need that. Why have they given you a cane? You don't need this cane. Why are you using your cane?" And there was a lot of pushback initially from my family. And I had a friend who was a cane user, so he and I would spend time together, and I liked spending time with him because he used his cane and I used my cane, and it felt quite normal. And his parents were, like you say, they were like, "Well, you don't go out without your cane. You have to use your cane." And if they were driving us somewhere in the car, they'd be like, "Do you both have your canes before we drop you off?" My family, growing up, I had cousins and friends and everything, and we'd all just run around together. And it was very much, I just did everything that all the other kids did. I roller skated, I biked. I had so many accidents and injuries because I'd crash into things, I'd fly off curbs, and nobody made the connect. It was just, my mum was a young mum, and so I think she didn't have any experience of blindness. She didn't have any, and so she just kind of was like, "Okay, well, I know she's got this eye condition, but I don't really know what it means for her. So I just want her to do everything that everyone else does, and I'm sure she'll figure it out."
That's awesome.
Doesn't sound like responsible parenting when I say it out loud now. It's just like, but I think it did me good though, because I do feel now that there are situations where I know a lot of people who are in my situation are like, "I don't have the confidence, I couldn't do that." And I'm very much just, well, I'm just going to try it. I'm just going to suck it and see. I'm going to see how it goes. We'll figure it out on the fly.
There's a flip side to it, because I grew up very fortunately, I had access to riding a bike or shooting baskets and out in front of the house. We grew up in a suburban cul-de-sac, so it wasn't like some crazy urban environment, but I was out there with sighted kids doing what kids do, right? Playing tag and playing football and playing, just running all over, and absolutely taking out mailboxes in the process and falling down all sorts of stairs and things. But I think, it, as much as it that is the counter is, well, you did do all these things, and you were exposed to them just with all the kids around you, and you weren't using a cane when you did that. So it was kind of like, well, your muscle memory was developed, your kind of problem-solving skills were developed in a sense, but then definitely when it came down to time to get out in public and actually be self-sufficient, you started to see all these sort of cracks emerging, right? You go from kind of not being, this cane user, but not only do you then, thanks to love, discover, that you that you want to use the cane, and you get into clearly developing kind of this understanding, but then you meet Daniel, or you kind of encounter Daniel, and you learn not only about other kind of the O&M side, but you become an instructor and you really lean into it, right? And can you talk a bit about that? Because that is the best. I love that.
I did. I kind of had I'm a bit of an evangelist now. I'm very much, I like working with children and young people. I work with adults too, but I enjoy working with them because I feel like a lot of the work that I do is with the whole unit, the families, the friends, and it's really important to talk to parents about situations like you talked about with your mum, saying, because they won't, you have to be, the cane shouldn't be in mum's handbag, the cane should be in your hand and being visible and you being comfortable with it. And I worked for an organisation in Scotland called Visibility, and they are one of the local kind of blindness organisations. And they brought Daniel Kish to the UK to work with young people, but also to teach some of us to instruct in echolocation. So there were 4 of us, all visually impaired, who spent 2 or 3 weeks with Daniel sort of learning and walking around the streets of Glasgow. When you do lean into it, it's very doable. And if you're out there doing it, it becomes easier. The more you encounter and the more you allow yourself to do, the more you can do. And then becoming and realising that not everyone who is blind will make a good O&M instructor, because blindness doesn't necessarily equate to good skills. But because I had teaching experience, and it's something that teaching and coaching is something that I have other skills in, I found that I really enjoyed it and could relate to it really well. So Daniel said, would you like to, become an instructor? Would you like to work with me? And I said, yes. And so I was able to travel and instruct for him in various places with him and with other instructors around the world, teaching, the echolocation piece. And also in the States, you do way more structured discovery type teaching than we do here in the UK. Structured discovery is we do A to B route-based mobility. And when, doing qualifications here in the UK, it's very difficult as someone who for 15 or so years has been a real proponent and advocate of structured discovery to then go back to, you must hold your cane in this position and you must hold your cane in that position. And why does your cane cut? And I'm like, and I think my cohort found it incredibly useful to have me. I was the only visually impaired person on the class. And they were like, well, why is your cane like a foot longer than it should be? And I would teach them. And so we'd spend all day learning, but at lunchtime and then at the end of the day, they would say, can you teach us about this? And can you teach us about that? So they got the standard teaching, but they also got the alternative teaching. And I feel like there are now 20 O&Ms who have gone out into Scotland who are really they're far more broadly qualified and far more broad than their sort of peers are. And I think what the takeaway from me for that was, they said, what you talk about just makes a lot of sense because you're a blind person talking to us about why this is good and why this makes sense. And the lecturers are two-sighted people telling us, well, this, and this. But actually, you as a blind person, you're out there living it and doing it every day. And what you say makes sense.
And this leads me back to the echolocation piece. When I first encountered Daniel, and I've met Daniel, and certainly a lot of people have seen Daniel because he's been on, different shows and things over the years. People would ask me, and I think for Rachel and David, I'm sure people are like, well, do you do this echo stuff? And what they imagine is that we walk around kind of doing a clicker sort of approach. And I would say, no, we naturally use echolocation all the time.
I tell people you can hear buildings, and I'm sure I get some funny looks, but when you walk by a very tall building, you can tell there's something way above you. Or if you walk through a carport, right, you can tell, the echoes are different. And you don't have to click, but you can if that's helpful. Or even if you walk by a fence, you can tell if it's wood versus chain link. And those are all environmental clues that can kind of help you realize where you are.
I've just learned how to get to Sydney Airport. And one of the things that I do is when I get from the baggage claim area back to the train system, there's a very high ceiling and then it slowly goes down to almost like a tunnel because I've actually got to walk down to the station. And it's right at that point where the assistant ring is, to take your guide dog to the loo and so on. And it actually works really well because I can actually feel, and the sound changes as you go from a very tall space and very open to a very closed in lowered roof type stuff. And it's just so automatic that, I just don't even think about it. It's absolutely amazing. It's when that type of stuff's taken away from me, it's like, where's my sixth sense gone? I want it back. So yeah, it does work really nicely.
Definitely. I was just going to say, one of the things that Daniel will say, he and I are good friends, and I'm really pleased that we've been able to sort of remain friends and colleagues. He says, I didn't invent echolocation. Blind people have been doing it since there were blind people. But one of the things that I also find is a lot of people who I teach, they explain, but they don't have the vocabulary to describe what they're hearing. They don't have the words. So it's almost like enabling them to describe what they're doing and to be able to use it. Because again, exactly what Rachel said, it's, you can tell the difference between a wooden fence or a chain link fence or a glass window wall and a brick wall. But what does that actually mean? And a lot of the work that I do, I'm not teaching people that sound means that because they know that. But what I'm then teaching them is, especially here in the UK, we're not taught to think for ourselves, and we're not taught to use common sense and logic and problem solving. We're taught A, B, look for this landmark, look for that landmark. So I'm saying, okay, if you're in Glasgow city centre, for example, and you're hearing the building, which is brick, but then you start to hear glass, that's probably a door. So then you can start swinging your cane looking for a door panel. And so a lot of what I do is, just bridging that gap between what seems like almost supernatural daredevil type stuff to actual bringing it back to day-to-day stuff.
I love it. And the other piece, and you talk about this, and I think for anyone who, whether you're a seasoned cane user or someone who's newer to using a cane, is the type of cane you use and how you even know the length of that cane. And everyone will have a different preference as to what cane they like. I'm an Ambitech user. I like a heavier cane. I like just that weight, and I like a rolling cane tip. But I was working with a friend of mine who is a distributor of ours who's newer, losing a lot more vision and has just started using a cane a bit more. He's a very tall guy, probably 6'8"-ish, 6'10"-ish. Wow. And his cane was like up to his, not even up to his rib cage. And I'm like, what are you doing? And my thought was, I think he has an identity cane, which is what I refer to it here. Meaning, more so I'm low vision. I have some vision, but you'll know this. And I was telling him, you're going to be so slouched down and you're not going to have any time to react to anything if you do find some obstacles with a cane that short. So can you talk a bit about, I guess just in that, for those who are out there, because we will have lots of listeners who maybe are newer, to vision loss or who are just kind of like, well, I should be using a cane a bit more. Not that everyone will want to choose the right cane, but you talk about 3 different types of canes. Can you summarize that into what you kind of talked about in your 3 types of cane piece that I was reading about?
Sure. So here in the UK we call them a symbol cane, a guide cane, and then a long cane. And I think a symbol cane is what you guys would call an identity cane. Which essentially, it's kind of Ron Seal. It does exactly what it says on the tin. It lets people know that you have a vision impairment. It's not intended to find obstacles or detect anything. It's literally just there as a baton to show. It's like a badge to say, I am visually impaired. A guide cane is the next step up from that. A guide cane, again, not really supposed to be used the way a long cane is, but you can use it perhaps to check the height of a step or to tap to see how far away a barrier is. Again, they're very light. They're not very robust. They're not supposed to, and they're short. They're not supposed to be used on the ground, but they're a great sort of bridge for people who are maybe losing their sight. They're losing their sight later in life. They're uncomfortable with the idea of going straight to a long cane. And then you have the long cane, which is the one that most people who are blind are using all the time. It's the one that you can swing back and forward. They come in all different shapes, sizes, materials. There are a dozen or more different tips you can put on the end, of your cane, depending on the terrain and what you're doing. And those are the canes that really facilitate, commuting and traveling and independence and enable you to detect obstacles and, curbs and steps and do all that. I'm a big, get a long cane. When kids are young, get a long cane in their hand, be comfortable with your cane and be proud of your cane.
I think also people don't understand, and structured discovery is extremely important to learn about our surroundings, and we do so much of that here in the National Federation of the Blind, and many places support and promote that. But there is a lot of technique to using a cane properly.
For you to be able to use this cane most effectively and most efficiently and to benefit you the most, you need to learn how to use it properly from somebody who can teach you how to use it properly and why 2-point touch is better than sweeping or constant contact, and why this technique or that technique, and even learning things like pre-cane skills, using some pre-cane skills in combination with cane skills.
Yeah. Well, I know this time went by very fast, and just really appreciate your time, Michelle. And I believe you're going to stick around with us for the next segment here, but thank you so much for coming on, talking a little bit about your experience yourself. It's just great to have, and even to have an international flavor to the See Things Differently with Humanware podcast. It's tremendously appreciated. So thank you for being here.
It's absolutely my pleasure. I'm not sure how often Glaswegians get caused to be called international flavor, but I will take it. Thank you.
We're going worldwide. So we're starting with Scotland. We're going out from there. So thank you. Welcome back to See Things Differently, the podcast, and this is going to be our hot take piece. Michelle is still with us, and why not, if you're talking O&M and you want to have an issue that can be debated by blind people here and far, everywhere, is going to be the classic cane versus guide dog. Not necessarily debate, but really we're always asked, and I personally have not ever had a guide dog, and we can get into that in a moment. But we all have different thoughts here. And David, I know you're a guide dog user, and Rachel, I think you were a guide dog user, although as long as I've known you, you haven't had a dog. But before we get into whether you use them or not, Michelle, are you a guide dog user, or are you a primary cane user?
I am a guide dog user, yes, I am.
Oh, nice.
I know. Scandal.
I love it. Personally, I have never gotten a guide dog for two reasons. Number one, I never went and took the time to go get my first guide dog. And I think this is really what got me, because I went from high school to college. I did not take the time. I didn't want to go and get and kind of spend the time to get a dog for the amount of time it would take. And then secondly, being now I'm a father, so I've become a lot more responsible with age. But I certainly was not, really feeling the whole taking care of the dog aspect of owning the dog, feeding the dog, taking the dog out. It's very, very important. And I certainly now would probably commit to it a lot. And I would certainly do it. And I've seen the empowerment that a dog can bring. But I personally have always been a cane user. Floor is open. Michelle, I guess we'll start with you. And why the dog? And certainly, when do you say no dog today, or no dog in this scenario? We're going to go back to the white cane.
So very quickly, I was 17 when I trained with my first dog. He had some problems, and then I very quickly got matched with the second one. So I spent about 4 years when I was much younger with dogs. I had two very unfortunate dogs, and I said no more. Lucky white heather. Clearly, I'm not meant to use dogs, and there was a massive gap. I lived in Vancouver, I travelled all over the world using my cane. I was perfectly happy. Came back to Glasgow and thought, I'm going to go on the guide dog waiting list. I went back and forward on it because I just wasn't sure, because one of the key things that you've just said is looking after a dog is a lot of responsibility. You can't just fold it up and throw it in the cupboard at the end of the day. And there are all sorts of things to consider when you have a dog. So for me, the big things to consider were I do a lot of travelling. How will a dog cope with the amount of international travelling and the varied environments that I encounter? And also, we have a lot of access refusals with dogs here, particularly in the taxi and Uber environment. That was my number one reservation for getting a dog, because I thought, do I want to deal with that? Can I deal with this arrival anxiety all the time? But for me, I am confident. I'm a confident and competent cane user. Guide dog mobility enables me to be faster than I walk pretty quickly with my cane. But I also have arthritis in my wrist and various parts. So sometimes using a cane for, long distances and, a full day out, it can get quite tiring. And I just feel like because I'm doing the navigating, the dog takes all the stress of finding the obstacles away. And dog use combines very well with echolocation, because you can still use all those echolocation techniques. Like you can still listen for canopies and for ceilings lowering and buildings. And, you can use cues like when you hear a building end, you can use that effectively. I think it's very important, however, that you should never just go straight to a dog. I think it's really important that the fundament, and I will die on this hill, people should know how to use a cane, and people should keep up their cane skills when they have a dog, because too often, here in the UK especially, our waiting lists can be 3-4 years right now for dogs, and people are just becoming isolated and trapped because they do not have the cane skills.
In so many places here, it is absolutely a prerequisite to even get a dog. You have to have some very solid foundational, not just cane skills, but orientational ability skills in general. So it's huge. David, what about you as a dog user? How long have you been a dog user? What are your thoughts? Yeah. Why the dog?
Do I have to admit to how long I've had guide dogs?
You could tell us how many you've had.
That's much nicer. I'm up to my 5th guide dog now. I actually quite like the fact, Michelle, that you said keep up your cane skills, because I always say to people, okay, you've got a guide dog, it's taking you places, it's obstacle avoidance, it's doing this, it's doing that. But if your guide dog gets sick, or it's a noisy environment, or anything else might happen, you must be able to still use your cane. I use my cane all the time, because sometimes I just think, you know what? I don't want to work my dog today. I just want to go for a stroll around the bike park and have a bit of a relax. Or I'm going to go to a place where I know it's going to be a rock concert and it's going to be 96 decibels. I'm not going to expose my dog to that level of noise. I was getting a Uber from the airport to where I'm staying here in Adelaide, and for some odd reason, Louisa, my guide dog, kept wanting to go off the footpath, and I thought, hang on a minute, this is a really busy part of the airport. I do not want to be stepping off a path unless I have to. So I got my cane out and I thought, I'll just work out. And there was literally about 5 inches of space between a bunch of trolleys and the curb. And I thought, oh, that's what she was trying to tell me. Because half the time I go, what are you doing, you silly animal? And I was like, oh, actually, she's being a really good guide dog at the moment. So having my cane also takes that stress out of me thinking, well, what's the dog doing? Is the dog being distracted? Versus, no, your dog is actually doing a really, really good job. So, yeah, I always use it's always in my bag as a standby, and I find it really good. Yeah, so people that sort of say cane versus guide dog, it's like, well, actually, no, it's both together.
Rachel, what about you? As someone, so, I mean, you used a dog for a while. I know you've been on my team since 2018, and you haven't had a dog since then, but when did you have a dog? And what are your thoughts, I guess, as someone who's been in the adults kind of space with both setups?
So I used a guide dog way back in college, so it was a while ago now, and she was great for that time because obviously there's lots of crowds. Talk about lunchtime in the dining hall, tons of crowds, or you go in from class to class, and the dog just did wonderfully at guiding me through the crowds. And they are obstacle avoiders, as we've all said. Your cane is an obstacle finder. When she kind of just developed some stress and couldn't handle the responsibilities of the job anymore, and we found that out when she just kind of stopped in the middle of the street one day. It was just like, no, I'm not going. And I said, well, we need to go because there's a car coming right at me. So it became an unsafe situation. So it was a very sad time because I had to end her working career early. And the school came and dealt with all of that. But I noticed after, having used a guide dog for 2.5 years, and you find so much more with your feet with a cane than you do with a guide dog. So I do miss the speed and agility that a guide dog brings, but also there is a lot to be said for walking with my cane. I also walk pretty fast. I'm usually on a mission when I'm out on a walk, and so just using your cane in a way that is safe and that works, it is different than a guide dog, but I'm glad that I've had the experience of using both mobility aids, if you will. And those who travel with their guide dogs, I love it because sure, like Michelle mentioned, there could be a little bit of arrival anxiety. Will I get a ride? Will the driver just drive away and leave me? Or will I have a great interaction? Doing all of the travel I do for work, a cane works for me. It's so much easier to kind of fold up and put in the seat pocket and put my carry-ons where they need to go, and I'm off and on my way. But I do love watching great guide dog teams, and I know the advantages that it can bring.
And certainly you learn lots and lots of techniques for correcting and getting the dog to be the dog you expect. I mean, there's so much there. You build a very, very, very special relationship. I mean, people and dogs have had very special relationship, but this is a whole different level.
In fact, this one, because I was thinking, do I really want a new guide dog now? And, I just use the cane. But I'm so independent, and because I do a lot of like karate stuff and I do this and that, the other thing in the community and so on, I just wanted to keep my independence, and there's nothing nicer than just getting off at a train late at night and just saying, find the stairs.
Yep. Absolutely, yeah.
It's great to talk about. I think for anyone listening, remember, feel free to send us feedback. Send us feedback, podcast@humanware.com. Thank you so much, Michelle, for joining us and being here for both of these segments. So thanks again.
Thank you, guys.
In my wanderings, I wandered down to Victoria virtually and found one of our colleagues down there who is Larissa Byers. So hi, Larissa.
Thank you very much.
Now, can you tell me first, firstly, what made you interested in joining Humanware? And I guess part of that question is, what's your background? And then how did you end up going to Humanware?
Yep, okay. My background is I am an orthoptist. So I've worked in private clinics and hospitals. I've worked in research. I worked in epidemiology research. I've also coordinated clinical trials. But I got into human wear. I used to work at Guide Dogs in New South Wales, and I used to recommend a lot of human wear products. I liked the products. And then when I moved back to Melbourne, I was offered a job at human wear, and I thought, well, I like these products. So yes, okay.
Cool. Well, that makes sense. So what parts of Australia do you cover? Because I'm assuming, being one person, you don't actually do the whole of Australia. So what parts of Australia do
I
you
pretty
cover?
much do. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Yes, I cover Victoria, South Australia, Western Australia, and Tasmania. So half of Australia, I suppose.
Is that mainly, is that appointment based? Do you visit clients? Do you visit organisations?
So in Victoria, definitely home visits, end user based, as well as organisations. In other states, it is predominantly visiting organisations. When I do make a visit to another state, sometimes an organisation may want me to visit someone in their home or in their office, but that's usually determined by the organisations. Yeah.
Okay. So what's sort of the process? So somebody rings up HumanWare and says, I don't know, I'd like a demo of, say, the new Prodigy for Windows device. What happens to that process after that?
So if they're in Victoria, where I'm located, then I will contact them and we'll organise a time for me to come over and I'll bring it and do a demo. If they're in another state and they contact us directly, I would probably recommend that they visit their local or contact their local organisation, and then I would contact their local organisation, giving them the heads up and sort of help link those two together. And in some situations, we could post out a device to the end user. It depends on what the device is. And we could do a virtual demonstration where they would have it there in front of them and I could talk them through it. Or sometimes it's just a virtual demonstration where I have it with me and we have a virtual appointment and I can talk them through it that way as well.
As a HumanWare person, that you're across all the devices, but do you want to mention the ones that you're primarily responsible for?
Okay. So I definitely deal with the low vision products more so than the Braille, especially now that we have you on board. So we've got our Explore range. So there are electronic magnifiers. They're quite portable. We've got the Explore 5, which is quite small, 5-inch. That has just recently been upgraded to have a USB-C charging port instead of the old micro USB, so that's nice. So we can get rid of that silly micro USB cable. Thank God. So that one's quite portable, good for sort of just like spot reading tasks, taking me to the shops, to a restaurant, all that sort of stuff. We've got Explore 8. That's a little bit bigger. If you've got a low to moderate vision impairment, that's probably quite sufficient for you to be able to sit down and read the newspaper or, a book. We've also just recently released the Explore 8 stand. So that's available now. And then we've got the Explore 12, which is bigger again, a little bit less portable, but fits into a laptop bag, and that's also available with the stand. That's always been available with the stand. So that's our Explore range. We've also got the Reveal 16 and the Reveal 16i. There are desktop, less portable options. They've both got a 16-inch screen. The Reveal 16 is just live magnification, and the 16i has OCR, which is text-to-speech, basically. And then we've got a new product, which is Prodigy for Windows, that's just come out. So that is live magnification and OCR that's available on your Windows device. So it's just a software program that you can purchase, and if needed, if you don't have a document camera, there's a document camera that you can purchase along with it. So that's our newest
Okay.
low vision product.
So we've got you in the sort of the southern part of, or sort of southernish part of Australia, including Western Australia and Tasmania. So you're for sort of like, so you're demoing and showing people stuff and everything else. What happens with technical support?
A couple of different ways you can go about this. You can contact me directly. If it's a basic blindness device query, often I can help. But if it's a little bit more technical and you've contacted me directly, I'll usually say, I'll have to get back to you and talk to one of my experts. So if you want to talk to an expert regarding Braille devices, then it's probably best that you contact our head office. And if you call us on 02 9686 2600, and then you select blindness tech support, that will take you through to Arthur. And Arthur will be a lot more equipped to help you than I will in the more technical issues. Or you can email us on au.support@humanware.com. If it's low vision products, then you can also contact our head office or you can contact me directly. My direct contact is 0488 298819. And my email is Larissa, which is LARISSA .bias, BYASS, @humanware.com.
So look, thank you for coming on. If people would want to get in contact with me at Humanware myself, you can email me david.woodbridge@humanware.com.
Welcome back to the cringe-worthy story of the month. And in really keeping with this O&M theme, and I'm sure David and Rachel, you have done this, I recently had an instance where had I not been prepared, I would have had I learned because of a previous story that I needed to be prepared. So I was actually in a hotel room. I had gone down to the vending machine to get some tea. There was a tea station in the lobby. When I went down there, I unfolded my cane and, to leave the room. I walked down. I am down there and I folded my cane up to sit down and have a cup of tea, and the elastic band snapped in my cane. And I was reminded of a time. Now, fortunately, I was all right because I had a spare, right, up in my room, and I thought, I'm going to go get my spare cane. But I was reminded of a time in Toronto where I'm at the airport, and I did not have a spare cane, and a luggage cart, one of those big, unwieldy luggage rolling cart machines that you're supposed to take like 19 suitcases on, ran my cane over and broke it. And I was at the beginning of a trip, and it was not good. It was not good. I was like, oh, dear. And I had no spare at the time, and this was early in my travel endeavors. But you talk about cringeworthy. I didn't have a mobility aid, right? And I'm in an airport around in a very unfamiliar environment with a cane that, while it was functional, it really was serving an identity cane kind of purpose at that point, as we talked about earlier with Michelle. I basically had no usable cane. I had something I could hold in front of me to give people the semblance that I am going to, I'm blind and I'm going to need some assistance here. But I had no tip, and I was in big trouble. And I learned from that point forward to always have a spare. Have you ever had issues, either of you, where you've run into just these snafus? And I have a lot of these crazy snafu stories, but these cane ones always stand out. And I've now broken a couple of canes over the years. But how about you guys?
I broke a cane at an O&M conference.
That's the best place ever to break a cane.
That was my safety net story. It was a great place to break a cane because there were people who knew how to fix it, or who was like, you know what, we have a spare at our table, I'll go get you one. So I feel very fortunate. That was my safety net if you ever, and from that point on, I always carry a spare cane in my backpack because you never know. It is a wild world out there.
Do we ask how you broke it, though?
Yeah, what'd you do?
Somebody ended up tripping over it and ended up breaking it. So keep a spare with you at all times.
So this is a funny, cringe-worthy moment. So I don't know if I told you this story, but I do karate. So I walked in there one day with my weight cane, and I had my cane out, which is fine. And then I had this person come up to me and say, "Don't you know the rules of the dojo?" And I went, pardon? And they said, you're using your bow staff off the mat. Why are you waving it around like that? That's extremely dangerous. Don't you understand there's young children around it? You can hit with it. And I said, it's a white cane for a blind person. They went, what? I said, it's a cane. It's not a bow staff. And they went, oh, I'm so sorry. It just looked like one of our bows that we use for karate. I went, nah.
And I think when we're kids, we all lose our canes, right? We don't remember where they are. Like, we forget them. We don't want to use them. We leave them at home. We leave them at school.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know.
Yeah. There's nothing worse about trying to get on a train and having your cane just disappear out of your hand between the platform and the train onto the track.
I have heard of this happening on an airplane as well. Someone who was a very good friend of mine lost a cane this way from the edge of the jet bridge into the plane, went straight down. And they decide to get on the plane because they're like, well, I'm not going to hold up the line here. And they're sitting and someone brings their cane and says, yeah, the baggage team figured somebody dropped this. It was like this white cane came falling through the jet bridge, you know.
He rescued it. That's amazing.
I love that one. That's a good one.
I have left multiple canes. This happened more than once on the roof of the car. Now, you might think, Peter, why would you put a cane on the roof of the car? And I'll tell you, with two really young kids, oftentimes I will fold my cane, and as I'm getting them in the car seat, instead of throwing it into the front where I sit, I put it on the top so I can get my kids in the car seat and then just automatically get in the car. We're driving away and I hear, and I'm like, oh, no. And it was gone. Like, we were like cruising at that point. There's nothing I could do.
I think the motto to the story is always carry around 2 canes if you at least. One you're using and a spare one.
Keep that in mind. Don't have your own cringeworthy stories, although we would love to hear them. podcast@humanware.com if you would like to share a cringeworthy cane story. And I will be gathering. I have received a couple of very lovely pieces of feedback at that email address. So thank you to those of you who've sent something in. Anyone who would like to send in further, we can definitely comment on them on a future podcast. So thank you. All right, everyone, it's time for the tips and tricks part of our show. And today, keeping with the theme of O&M, and we do have an O&M device, an orientation and mobility product called the StellarTrek, I'm going to talk a bit about map browsing mode. And some of you may have heard me do demonstrations on this in the past because it's not new to Humanware. What map browsing mode allows you to do is it lets you virtually simulate a location, right? So you place yourself at a virtual spot, and you can move around the map as though you were walking the street grid at that location. So I'm sitting in my basement here in Chicago, and I'm actually going to we're going to walk around the neighborhood of a friend of mine who just moved into a new condo in the River North area of Chicago. And I was just over there and I dropped a landmark at that location. And now I've come home and I actually want to check out and see what bus stops are around there. So I'm going to pull up that location and we are going to virtually walk around some of his streets so that when I actually go there in person, I will know the lay of the land. All right, so I have my StellarTrek and I am going to select a landmark from my list of recorded landmarks. And these could either be voice tags or they could be text, or addresses, depending on how you want to save your landmark. So I'm going to press the go-to key, which is above our directional arrows on the StellarTrek. We have 2 buttons. We have a button that contains a hash mark, that is our back button, and the right button. So again, above our directional arrows, the left button is back, and the right button is our select a landmark or go-to key. I'm going to press that go-to button here.
Select a landmark as your destination. 55 landmarks.
Costco.
Chicago. Illinois. Press confirm to start route in pedestrian mode.
So you heard that Costco is my first landmark. Now, you can sort these in many different ways. You can even sort them by the cities that you're in. And I have lots of landmarks. I do a lot of travel, and I love to drop landmarks, even just at entrances to parks when I'm with my kids, or where certain bus stops may be. If I don't want to just look at the map, if I just want the landmark to be spoken. So I use this these landmarks in many ways, but the one I want to find is actually I have this sorted oldest to newest. So Costco was recorded long and long ago, but I am going to move to the left here.
Sort.
And
enter an address.
After we have enter an address,
Press KR. Chicago, Illinois. Press confirm to start route in pedestrian mode.
That just says KR. And that is because that is what I've named this landmark. And it says that if I press confirm right now, I would be guided to that landmark. But I don't want that. I'm going to press my down arrow, and I have some other options here of what I can do with a pre-saved or recorded landmark.
Start in motorized mode. Press confirm to start route in motorized mode.
If I wanted vehicle instructions, I would choose this, but I'm going to press my down arrow one more time.
Enter map browsing mode. Press confirm to enter map browsing mode from this location.
And at this point, this is where, and again, I can move down and I could delete this landmark or rename this landmark. If I had a bad recording, maybe there was a bus driving by or something, I could re-record it once I'm in a quieter environment. But at this point, I want to enter map browsing mode at this location. So I'm going to press confirm.
Entering map browsing mode. You are currently on West Institute Place. Heading east.
And we hear that I am currently, again, I've simulated this location. I'm on West Institute Place and I'm heading east. If I push my Where Am I button, which is our bottom left key below our directional arrows,
near 314 West Institute Place,
you hear that I'm told the address that I'm at. So I'm standing in front of 314 West Institute Place here in Chicago. I am facing east. So if I press my up arrow, I will walk forward or east at this point. So let's go forward and see where we end up.
In 281 feet. Four-way intersection with stop sign, West Institute Place. Crossing, North Franklin Street.
So I'm now at Institute and Franklin, and I hear that this intersection has a stop sign, and I will hear if it's a three-way or a four-way. Now, what that doesn't tell me is, is it a four-way stop? I will tell you right now, this is not a four-way stop. Franklin is quite a busy street. But Institute Place has a stop sign at this intersection. So I could, turn left or right. Let's turn right and let's actually walk. Again, we're heading east. We get to this intersection. We're going to turn right. So I'm going to press my right arrow.
On your right, North Franklin Street.
We've turned right. We're on Franklin. And now if I press my up arrow, we will be heading south because we've turned. We're heading east. We've turned right. We're now heading south. I'm going to press my up arrow and walk south to the next intersection.
In 295 feet. Four-way intersection with traffic light, North Franklin Street. Crossing, West Chicago Avenue.
So this is a pretty big intersection, Franklin and Chicago, in the River North area here. And we hear that it has a traffic light. Now, at this point, I hear it's a four-way. And I could certainly go left or right. Let's turn right, though, and let's walk back down.
On your right, West Chicago Avenue.
So now I'm going to be heading west. I'm going to hit my up arrow and walk west.
In 413 feet. Four-way intersection with traffic light, West Chicago Avenue. Crossing, North Orleans Street.
So here's Chicago and Orleans. If I press up arrow again, I would continue straight. And again, we're heading west on Chicago at this point. Even when you're in virtual map browsing mode, you are able to pull up lists of landmarks, and those also do contain transit stops here in North America, as well as in some other spots. In Europe, we have not found consistent transit accuracy, so we do not have transit stops overlaid on these maps. These are HERE maps, H-E-R-E maps. I am going to press and hold my Where Am I key to pull up a list of landmarks that are around me.
What's around? 55 items. 1. 37, Sedgwick, bus station. 65 feet. Press confirm to enter route preview in pedestrian mode from this location.
And we hear that there is a bus stop right away. The bus stop is shown, the number 37 Sedgwick bus stop. And what happens is, again, the transit stops will be listed here, certainly in North America, and I can move left and right through this list. Now, I've just pulled up every single landmark that is around. And we hear, again, that I have some options even within. So let's just move, if I pull up these landmarks, even though I'm virtually browsing, if I press my down arrow.
Enter route preview in motorized mode.
I can get a route preview for this, but I'm going to keep coming down.
Report point of interest. Press confirm to report invalid point of interest.
You can report this point of interest to us. That would be necessary if you wanted to flag an old business. If there was something that was no longer around, we are certainly not the keepers of these maps. HERE maps is, and the data could be out of date. And if you find businesses that are out of date, these will then, if you flag them, they will be sent to us the next time you turn your unit on and connect to Wi-Fi. And we would be able to then get in touch with Here Maps and report this as being a bad landmark.
Set as a possible destination. Press confirm to set this point of interest as a possible destination.
So here we have the set as a possible destination option, and this would be where we are able to save this number 37 bus stop as a landmark, meaning it could be chosen as a destination. A landmark does not have to be a destination. You certainly could have landmarks that you maybe never want to navigate to, maybe just, again, something you may walk by that you want to be notified of, but you don't want to ever see them as actual destination. If I come down one more.
Enter route preview in pedestrian mode. Press confirm to enter route preview in pedestrian mode from this location.
I can enter route preview even in virtual mode. So this can be very useful depending on where it is you want to start and end. A very helpful feature allowing you to get the lay of the land or understand where and the street grid is or where locations are of things before you go to a hotel or before you go to that friend's house or before you go to that restaurant you want to walk to. And this is different from previewing an existing route or a route you have walked. This is a way to virtually place yourself at any given point and walk around to understand and build that environmental literacy of that location. And that is our tip and trick for this week. All right, everybody, time to talk about where we will be, where you can find us in upcoming shows. From April 8th to April 10th, we will be at the Principals of the Schools for the Blind, or POSB STEM Institute. That will be taking place in Fremont, California at the Best Western Plus Garden Court. That will be a great time to come see Rachel. She will be there holding it down. And right after that, she will continue to be in California with Kevin and some other humanware representation, and we have presentations at the CTEBVI. We love our acronyms in this field. The California Braille Transcribers and Vision Teachers Conference. That'll be taking place from April 10th to the 13th at the San Francisco Airport Marriott. So come see us at either of those events, and as we get into the summer and the late spring, we'll look at other things in Europe and summer shows and lots of fun places where you can come say hi, and who knows, maybe even tell us you're a fan of the podcast. Thanks, everybody.
If you have comments or suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. Please send them to podcast@humanware.com. That's podcast@humanware.com. We'll see you next month.